The purple lights of the Zephyrian Empire painted the darkness of space like deadly stars. For 300 years, their crystal ships had moved through the galaxy like hunters seeking prey. They found it everywhere they looked. 47 different worlds had fallen to their power, and 47 different species now worked as slaves in their mines and factories. Commander Crix stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the stars pass by. His 6 eyes glowed with the satisfaction of a predator who had never known failure. Behind him, dozens of his crew worked at their stations, their tentacles dancing over controls that could destroy planets or bend minds to their will. The ship itself was a marvel of Zephyrian technology, built from living crystal that could repair itself and powered by the fears of conquered races. The weapon that made all of this possible sat in the heart of every Zephyrian ship. They called it the Neural Subjugation Array, but most species that encountered it never lived long enough to give it a name. The device could reach into the mind of any thinking being and rewrite their thoughts like a programmer changing code. Proud warriors became obedient servants. Brilliant scientists forgot their knowledge and worked in mines. Entire civilizations simply stopped fighting and began building monuments to their new masters. Crix remembered his first conquest as a young officer. The Altarians had been a proud race of flying creatures with technology almost as advanced as the Zephyrians themselves. Their homeworld was protected by powerful shields and defended by fleets of fast attack ships. The battle had lasted exactly 4 hours, not because the Altarians were weak, but because they had never faced an enemy. Who could turn their own minds against them? The Neural Subjugation Array had swept over their planet like a purple aurora. Within minutes, Altarian pilots were turning their weapons on their own ships. Ground forces laid down their arms and marched into prison camps they built themselves. Scientists began sharing the secrets of their technology with eager Zephyrian researchers. In 4 hours, a civilization that had lasted 10,000 years simply ceased to exist as a free people. That had been over a century ago, and the Altarians were still building ships for the Empire. Their children had been born into slavery and knew no other life. They worked happily in the factories, their minds shaped from birth to serve their masters. This was the fate of every species the Zephyrians encountered, and Crix had personally overseen the conquest of 12 different worlds. "Sir," called his aide Voss from across the bridge. The younger Zephyrian's tentacles were wrapped around a communication device, and his voice carried the excitement of someone with good news. "Our long-range scouts have found another inhabited system." Crix turned away from the viewing port and moved toward Voss with the fluid motion that all Zephyrians possessed. His species had evolved in the zero gravity of asteroid fields, and they moved through their ships like swimmers in an ocean of air. "Show me," he commanded. The main display flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of a small solar system on the edge of the galaxy. 9 planets orbited a yellow star, and the 3rd planet from the sun glowed with the blue and green colors that meant life. Clouds swirled around continents and oceans, and the dark side of the world sparkled with the lights of cities. "The inhabitants call themselves humans," Voss continued, his excitement growing. "Their world is called Earth. Our scouts estimate a population of about 8 billion individuals." Crix's mandibles clicked together in pleasure. 8 billion. New slaves would provide the Empire with workers for centuries. "What is their technology level?" he asked. "Primitive, but advancing rapidly," Voss replied. "They have nuclear weapons and basic space travel, but they are still confined to their home system. No faster-than-light capability detected. No energy. Shields. No advanced AI systems. Perfect," Crix said. Another weak species to add to the Empire's collection. He had conquered races far more advanced than these humans, and none had been able to resist the power of the Neural Subjugation Array. "How long until we can reach their system?" 3 standard days at maximum speed, sir. Crix nodded and began planning the conquest. The standard protocol was simple, and it never failed. A single cruiser would enter the system and position itself in orbit around the inhabited world. The neural subjugation array would activate, sending waves of mind-controlling energy across the entire planet. Within hours, the population would be completely under Zephyrian control. Local leaders would order their militaries to stand down. Scientists would begin transmitting all of their research to Zephyrian databases. Workers would start building the infrastructure needed to support the Empire's expansion. It was so routine that Crix barely needed to think about it anymore. He had performed this same conquest dozens of times, and the result was always the same. Some species tried to fight it first, sending their primitive weapons against Zephyrian shields that could withstand the explosion of suns. Others tried to hide, fleeing to remote parts of their worlds, or even to other planets in their systems. None of it mattered once the array activated. You could not hide from something that turned your own mind into a prison. Deploy Captain Ilix with the Void Piercer, Crix ordered. Standard Conquest Protocol. 1 cruiser should be more than sufficient for a primitive species like this. Voss nodded and began transmitting the orders. Across the Empire's fleet, Captain Ilix received his mission briefing and began preparing his ship for another routine conquest. The Void Piercer was one of the Empire's newer cruisers. Equipped with the latest version of the neural subjugation array, it could control the minds of an entire planet's population simultaneously, and Ilix had used it to conquer 6 different worlds in the past decade. What neither Crix nor Ilix knew was that the humans of Earth had been watching them. Deep space monitoring stations had detected the Zephyrian scouts months ago, and Earth's governments were already preparing for what was coming. In bunkers around the world, military leaders studied the few images their telescopes had captured of alien ships. Scientists analyzed strange energy readings that seemed to pulse from the vessels like heartbeats. General Jack Morrison stood in the North American Defense Command Center and watched the displays that showed the approaching alien fleet. He was a veteran of 3 wars and had never faced an enemy like this, but he had spent his entire career preparing for the unknown. Around him, officers and technicians worked frantically to coordinate Earth's defenses. Admiral Kane, he called to the woman standing at the Naval Command Station. Are our fleets in position? Admiral Lisa Kane nodded grimly. Every ship we have is either in orbit or ready to launch on your command, General. But, sir, we're looking at technology that's centuries ahead of ours. Our weapons might not even be able to scratch their hulls. Morrison knew she was right, but he also knew that surrender was not an option. Humanity had spent thousands of years fighting for freedom, and they were not about to give it up now. Whatever these aliens wanted, they would have to take it by force. Neither side knew that this conflict would change the galaxy forever. Captain Ilix guided the Void Piercer through the darkness between stars with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. The sleek cruiser cut through space like a blade, its crystal hull reflecting starlight in patterns that would have been beautiful if they had not carried such terrible purpose. Behind him on the bridge, his crew prepared for another routine conquest, checking systems and calibrating weapons that had broken the will of entire civilizations. The ship's neural subjugation array hummed quietly in the lower decks, its crystalline cores pulsing with energy that could rewrite minds across an entire planet. Ilix had used this weapon 12 times before, and the process was always the same. The primitive species would detect his approach and panic, sending their crude military forces to intercept him. He would position his ship in orbit above their homeworld and activate the array. Within hours, their own leaders would be ordering them to surrender. "Captain," called his navigation officer, "we are approaching the target system. Shall I take us to standard conquest position?" "Proceed," Ilix replied, settling into his command chair. Through the viewing ports, he could see the yellow star growing brighter ahead of them. Soon he would add another world to the Empire's collection, and another species would join the countless others working in Zephyrian mines and factories. The third planet appeared on his screens as a blue marble floating in the void. White clouds swirled around green and brown continents, and the dark side sparkled with millions of lights that marked cities and settlements. It was a beautiful world, and it would make an excellent addition to the Empire once its population had been properly controlled. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we are receiving multiple transmissions from the planet's surface. They appear to have detected our approach." Elix was not surprised. Most species noticed when alien ships entered their systems, and many tried to make contact before they understood what was about to happen to them. "Are they attempting to communicate?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Multiple languages, but our computers are translating. They are asking about our intentions and requesting peaceful contact." "Standard response," Elix ordered. The Empire had learned long ago that it was easier to position ships properly when the target species believed they were dealing with peaceful visitors. "Tell them we come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations. Request permission to enter orbit for cultural exchange." While his crew sent the false diplomatic messages, Elix studied the tactical displays that showed him everything he needed to know about Earth's defenses. The humans had nuclear weapons, which could be dangerous to unshielded ships, but their delivery systems were primitive. They had no energy weapons, no force fields, and no way to defend against the neural subjugation array. Most importantly, they showed no signs of the advanced mental disciplines that a few species had tried to use against Zephyrian mind control. Below the Earth's surface, General Morrison watched the alien ship approach on displays that showed every detail his satellites could capture. The vessel was unlike anything in human experience, built from what appeared to be living crystal and powered by energy sources that Earth scientists could not identify. It moved without visible propulsion and showed no signs of the heat signatures that human ships would generate. "Admiral Kane," he called across the command bunker, "what are our ships reporting?" "All orbital platforms are tracking the target," Kane replied, her fingers dancing over control panels that linked her to naval forces around the world. "But sir, our weapons officers are saying their hull configuration doesn't match anything in our databases. We have no idea if our missiles can even damage that thing." At his science station, Dr. Peter Collins adjusted his glasses and studied readings that made no sense according to human understanding of physics. The alien ship was generating energy patterns that seemed designed to interact with biological systems rather than mechanical ones. "General," he called, "I'm seeing something strange in their energy emissions. The ship appears to be charging some kind of directed energy weapon, but the targeting parameters suggest it's designed to affect living tissue rather than destroy physical targets." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. A weapon designed to affect living tissue could only mean one thing. The aliens were planning to use some kind of biological warfare against Earth's population. "How long until they reach orbital position?" he asked. 18 minutes at current speed," Kane replied. The Void Piercer settled into a stable orbit above Earth's largest population centers, its position carefully calculated to provide maximum coverage for the neural subjugation array. Elix watched his screens as cities full of humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their freedom was about to end forever. In a few minutes, those billions of people would become willing slaves of the Zephyrian Empire. "Array charging to full power," his weapons officer reported. "Estimated time to complete neural subjugation, 47 minutes for planetary population." "Excellent," Elix said. "The faster the process, the less chance there was for the humans to do something desperate, like launching nuclear weapons at their own cities. Begin transmission on my mark." The purple energy of the neural subjugation array began to build in. The ship's lower decks, crystalline cores spinning faster as they prepared to send waves of mind-controlling power down to the planet below. This was the moment that had broken every other species the Zephyrians had encountered. No matter how brave or determined they were, no thinking being could resist having their own thoughts turned against them. Fire, Ilex commanded. Purple light erupted from the void piercer like aurora borealis, cascading down through Earth's atmosphere in waves that should have overwhelmed every human mind on the planet. The energy washed over cities and towns, penetrating buildings and bunkers, reaching into every corner where human consciousness existed. Ilex settled back in his chair and waited for the familiar reports of complete success. Instead, his communications. Officer looked up with confusion. "Sir, I'm still receiving transmissions from the planet's surface. Military frequencies, civilian broadcasts, commercial networks, all still active." "Impossible," Ilex growled, his tentacles tightening around his chair arms. "Increase power to maximum setting. Perhaps their neural structure requires a stronger signal." The array hummed louder as more energy poured into it, sending waves of mental domination that could have controlled the minds of a dozen worlds simultaneously. A purple light grew brighter, bathing entire continents in energy that should have turned every human into an obedient servant of the Empire. But in the bunker below, Private Jake Martinez looked up from his communication station with a grin that would have terrified any Zephyrian who could see it. "Sir, we're getting reports from command centers worldwide. No behavioral changes detected. No cases of mind control. Whatever they're trying to do to us, it's not working." General Morrison stared at the tactical display showing the alien ship, pouring energy down at his planet, energy that should have been turning his species into slaves. Instead, his people were still free, still fighting, still human. For the first time in 300 years of conquest, the Zephyrian Empire had found a species that their ultimate weapon could not touch. "Admiral," Morrison said quietly, "I think it's time we showed our visitors what humans do when someone tries to take away our freedom." The emergency signal from Captain Ilex reached the Zephyrian command fleet like a scream in the darkness. For the first time in 3 centuries, a conquest had failed. The neural subjugation array, the weapon that had broken 47 different species, had met something it could not control. Commander Crix stood on his bridge and read the report with growing disbelief, his 6 eyes scanning the impossible words again and again. "The humans show no response to maximum array output," Ilex's message stated. "Neural energy is penetrating target brain tissue, but control patterns are being rejected. Population remains hostile and uncontrolled, requesting immediate reinforcement and guidance." Crix's mandibles clicked together in agitation as he forwarded the report to Supreme Commander Zix aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion. Within hours, an emergency council had been called, bringing together the most powerful leaders of the Zephyrian Empire. They gathered in the great crystal chamber where decisions that affected entire galaxies were made, their tentacles writhing with nervous energy as they tried to understand what had gone wrong. "Explain this failure," Supreme Commander Zix demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally overseen the conquest of 20 worlds. His ancient body showed the scars of battles fought before the neural subjugation array had made war obsolete, and his eyes burned with the fury of a predator denied its prey. Dr. Nex, the Empire's chief xenobiologist, activated the holographic display that dominated the center of the chamber. Images of human brain scans appeared in the air, rotating slowly as she began her analysis. "Every species we have conquered shares certain neural characteristics," she explained, her tentacles dancing over the controls. "Centralized command, structures, hierarchical thought processes, and clear pathways for external influence. The display changed to show brain scans from conquered species, the organized, crystal-like patterns of Altarian minds, the flowing networks of Centaurian consciousness, the geometric precision of vegan intelligence. All showed the same basic structure that made them vulnerable to the array's power. But the humans are different, Dr. Nex continued, bringing up new images that made several council members recoil in shock. Human brain scans showed chaotic tangles of neural pathways, contradictory signals firing simultaneously, and multiple centers of decision-making that seemed to work against each other as much as together. Their minds are not organized. They are chaos given consciousness. Impossible, growled General Vex, the Empire's most experienced military commander. No species can evolve intelligence from chaos. Order is required for thought, structure for consciousness. Yet here they are, Dr. Nex replied, highlighting specific areas of the human brain scans. Their neural networks have redundant pathways for every function. When the array tries to impose control through one pathway, the mind simply uses another. When we attempt to establish dominance in one region, consciousness shifts to a different area. It is as if their brains are designed to resist external control. Supreme Commander Zix studied the data with growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had been built on the assumption that all intelligent life followed the same basic patterns. Their technology, their society, their entire way of understanding the universe depended on the idea that minds could be controlled if you understood how they worked. The humans challenged everything they believed about consciousness itself. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was discovering just how unique they really were. In laboratories around the world, scientists studied the energy patterns captured during the alien attack. Dr. Susan Wright, working at the Cambridge Research Institute, made the breakthrough that would change everything. She had spent days analyzing the way the alien energy interacted with human brain tissue, and what she found amazed her. The technology is incredibly sophisticated, she explained to her research team, pointing to readings that showed the alien weapon's effects down to the cellular level. It identifies specific neural pathways and attempts to override them with artificial signals. Any normal brain would be completely overwhelmed. Her assistant, Dr. Paul Green, leaned forward to study the data more closely. But our brains aren't normal, are they? Not by any standard we can imagine, Dr. Wright confirmed. Human consciousness operates on principles that seem to defy logic. We can hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously. We make decisions based on emotion, while convincing ourselves we're being rational. We question our own thoughts, even as we think them. She brought up a comparison chart, showing human neural activity versus computer models of how organized minds should function. The difference was startling. Where computer models showed clean, efficient pathways for information and decision-making, human brains showed what could only be described as beautiful chaos. Our attention spans are fractured. Dr. Wright continued. We get distracted. We change our minds. We argue with ourselves. These aren't bugs in human psychology. Against an enemy like this, they're features that make us immune to mental control. Colonel Dan Foster, the military liaison assigned to the research project, tried to wrap his mind around the implications. So you're telling me that the same qualities that make us impossible to manage as a species also make us resistant to alien mind control? More than resistant, Dr. Wright said with a smile. We're fundamentally incompatible with their technology. They built a weapon designed to control organized, logical minds. We're neither organized nor logical, at least not in any way they can understand. The news spread through Earth's command structures like wildfire. For the first time since the alien ship had appeared, military leaders began to feel something other than fear. President Helen Carter addressed the world from the United Nations building. Her words carried to every nation on Earth. My fellow humans, she began, we have learned something extraordinary about ourselves today. The very qualities that make us argumentative, stubborn, and impossible to govern are also what make us free. Our enemies expected to find another compliant species. Instead, they found us. In the depths of space, Captain Ilix received new orders from the Empire's command fleet. Since the neural subjugation array had failed, he was to attempt direct communication with the human leadership. Perhaps they could be reasoned with, convinced to surrender in exchange for favorable treatment. It was a strategy the Empire had never needed to use before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The message he transmitted to Earth was simple: surrender now, and your species will be treated well as subjects of the Empire. Continue to resist, and we will be forced to use more direct methods to ensure your compliance. General Morrison read the alien ultimatum and laughed, a sound that would have chilled Zephyrian blood if they could have heard it. Admiral Kane. He called across the command bunker. Send them our reply. The message that went back to the Void Piercer was even simpler. Come and take it. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrian Empire faced an enemy that could not be controlled, could not be reasoned with, and refused to surrender. They were about to learn what 300 years of easy conquest had cost them. They had forgotten how to fight a war against people who wanted to be free. The first Zephyrian invasion fleet arrived at Earth 6 months after humanity's defiant reply echoed through space. Supreme Commander Zix had assembled the largest military force in the Empire's history, bringing together ships from across their conquered territories. 300 vessels of various sizes hung in the darkness beyond Earth's moon, their crystal hulls gleaming like deadly jewels in the starlight. For the first time in centuries, the Zephyrian Empire was preparing to fight. A real war, but Zix was discovering that his forces were not ready for such a conflict. The Empire's military doctrine had been built around the neural subjugation array, and without it, his commanders were like hunters who had forgotten how to track prey. Their weapons were designed to stun and subdue, not to kill and destroy. Their tactics assumed that enemies would surrender within hours, not fight back with desperate fury. Captain Ilix stood beside his Supreme Commander on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and watched the blue world spinning peacefully in the distance. "Sir," he said quietly, "our scouts report that the humans have been busy during the past 6 months. They have moved their entire industrial capacity to war production and launched hundreds of new military satellites." Zix's tentacles curled. With frustration. "It does not matter. They are still primitives with crude technology. One decisive strike will break their resistance and show them the futility of opposing the Empire." What Zix did not know was that humanity had spent those 6 months learning everything they could about their enemies. Every energy emission from Zephyrian ships had been analyzed, every movement pattern studied, every weakness catalogued by minds that specialized in finding ways to kill things more efficiently. Earth's orbital defense platforms bristled with new weapons designed specifically to exploit the flaws that human engineers had discovered in alien technology. Commander Rachel Torres floated in the command module of Defense Platform Alpha, watching her displays as the alien fleet began its approach. She had been a naval officer for 15 years, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for commanding humanity's first battle in space. Around her, technicians made final adjustments to weapons that had never been fired in anger, while communications officers coordinated with similar platforms scattered around Earth's orbit. "All stations, this is Torres," she broadcast on the command frequency. "Remember what we learned from their energy patterns. Their shields are optimized against their own weapons, not ours. They've been fighting pacified enemies for 3 centuries. Today they find out what happens when someone fights back." The battle began when Zephyrian dropships descended toward Earth's major cities, expecting to face demoralized defenders who would surrender at the first sign of superior technology. Instead, they encountered a species that had spent its entire history perfecting the art of warfare. Human fighters rose to meet them with weapons that the aliens had never seen before. Crude kinetic projectiles that punched through energy shields designed to stop exotic energy beams. Captain Steve Rogers piloted his experimental fighter through the swarm of alien ships, his weapon systems locked onto targets that moved with the graceful precision of dancers. The Zephyrians were beautiful flyers, but they had never learned to fight against opponents who shot back. "Command, this is Rogers," he called over his radio. "Their evasion patterns are predictable. They're trying to avoid damage instead of inflicting it." Above the atmosphere, the real battle raged between Earth's defense platforms and the Zephyrian fleet. Commander Torres watched her tactical display as human missiles slammed into alien hulls with devastating effect. The enemy's crystal armor could deflect energy weapons, but it shattered like glass when hit by chunks of metal moving at tremendous speed. "Target their command ship," Torres ordered her weapons officer. "If we can take out their leadership, the rest might lose coordination." But the humans were learning something else about their enemies, something that would prove even more dangerous than their technological weaknesses. Dr. Amanda Price, working with captured Zephyrian prisoners, made a discovery that changed everything. The aliens who had been taken during the battle were showing signs of something their species had not experienced in centuries: individual thought. "General Morrison," she reported from the interrogation facility, "we have a problem. The Zephyrian soldiers we captured are starting to ask questions. Not just about their situation, but about their orders, their mission, even their society." Morrison studied the reports with growing amazement. "What kind of questions?" "They want to know why they're following orders from commanders they've never met. They're wondering if conquest is really necessary for their survival. Some of them are even questioning whether their empire has the right to enslave other species." Dr. Price brought up brain scans of the captured aliens, showing neural activity that looked nothing like the organized patterns their species was known for. Exposure to human thought patterns is having an effect on them. Our chaotic way of thinking seems to be contagious. They're developing what we would call independent thought. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrian Empire was not just a military force. It was a society built on absolute mental conformity. Every member of their species thought the same thoughts, followed the same beliefs, and obeyed the same authority without question. They had used the neural subjugation array on themselves for so long that they had forgotten how to disagree. But contact with humanity was teaching them to think for themselves again, and that knowledge was spreading through their ranks like a virus. Zephyrian soldiers began hesitating before following orders. Ship captains started questioning their missions. Even officers found themselves wondering if their supreme commander might be wrong about the necessity of conquest. The battle for Earth became a battle for the minds of both species. As human forces captured more alien technology and learned to reverse engineer their faster-than-light drives, they also captured more prisoners. Each captured Zephyrian was exposed to human ideas about freedom, independence, and the right to think for oneself. Many of them found these concepts terrifying, but others began to embrace them with the enthusiasm of people discovering colors for the first time. Supreme Commander Zix watched his perfect invasion turn into chaos as his own soldiers began to rebel. Ships that should have been attacking human positions instead requested permission to withdraw. Ground forces that should have been advancing instead sat in their landing zones and argued about the morality of conquest. Worst of all, some of his captains were actually communicating with human forces, asking questions about concepts like democracy and individual rights. "This is impossible," Zix raged at his staff officers. "Our people do not think such thoughts. They cannot think such thoughts." But Captain Ilix, who had been listening to the reports from captured comrades, found himself speaking words that surprised him. "Perhaps, sir, The question is not whether our people can think such thoughts, but whether they should be allowed. 2. The look of horror on Zix's face was matched only by the look of shock on Elix's own features as he realized what he had just said. For the first time in his life, a Zephyrian had questioned the authority of his superior. The human virus of independent thought was spreading through the Empire's forces, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. On Earth, General Morrison watched the alien fleet beginning to break apart as ships deserted their formations and requested asylum with human forces. "Admiral Kane," he called across the command bunker, "I think we're winning this war without firing another shot." But the real victory was not military. It was philosophical. Humanity had discovered that their greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactics, but their ability to inspire others to think for themselves. The Zephyrian Empire was collapsing not from external attack, but from the radical idea that individuals should be free to choose their own destiny. 2 years after the failed invasion of Earth, Admiral Lisa Kane stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar warship and watched alien worlds burn with the light of freedom. The ship bore the name Freedom's Dawn, and it carried weapons that could shatter planets and ideas that could shatter empires. Behind her, a fleet of human vessels moved through space alongside ships from dozens of liberated species, all united by the simple belief that no one should have to surrender their right to think. The war had changed from Earth's desperate defense into something the galaxy had never seen before. As human forces captured Zephyrian technology and learned to build their own faster-than-light engines, they had discovered the true scope of the Empire's crimes. 47 different species lived as slaves, their minds controlled from birth, their cultures destroyed, their freedom stolen. But humanity had brought them something more powerful than advanced weapons, the knowledge that they could choose to be free. Kane's communications officer, Lieutenant Ben Murphy, looked up from his station with barely contained excitement. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender broadcasts from the Altarian system. Their planetary government has overthrown the Zephyrian occupation forces and is requesting to join the coalition." "Another world chooses freedom," Kane said with satisfaction. The Free Worlds Coalition had grown from a desperate alliance between Earth and a few defecting Zephyrian ships into a military force that now controlled half the galaxy. But their greatest weapon was not their ships or their soldiers. It was the simple act of showing enslaved peoples that they had the power to say no. The liberation of each world followed the same pattern. Human ships would arrive in a system and begin broadcasting on all frequencies, not threats or demands, but questions. Why do you obey leaders you never chose? Why do you work for masters who give you nothing in return? Why do you accept slavery when you could have freedom? The answers came slowly at first, whispered in secret meetings and hidden gatherings. But once the idea of choice took root, it spread like wildfire through populations that had forgotten. They could think for themselves. Dr. Peter Collins, now serving as the coalition's chief xenobiologist, studied the reports from newly liberated worlds with growing amazement. "The transformation is remarkable," he told Kane during their daily briefings. "Species that have been mentally suppressed for centuries are rediscovering creativity, art, individual expression, and independent thought in a matter of weeks." The freed Altarians had been among the most dramatic examples. After over a century of mental control, they had retained enough of their original culture to rebuild their society almost overnight. Their cities, which had been gray industrial complexes under Zephyrian rule, now blazed with the bright colors and soaring architecture that had once made their civilization famous across the galaxy. More importantly, they had joined the coalition with a fury that surprised even the humans. "They want revenge," explained Captain Maria Santos, who commanded the rebuilt ship Defiance. "Not just military victory, but the complete destruction of everything the Empire represents." They've lived as slaves for 5 generations, and they remember what freedom felt like. The final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld began with a fleet, so diverse that it looked more like a traveling carnival than a military force. Human ships with their angular, practical designs flew alongside Altarian vessels that looked like crystalline butterflies, Centauran craft that flowed like liquid metal, and dozens of other species that had thrown off their chains and chosen to fight. Each ship carried not just weapons, but the dreams of people who had never expected to be free. Supreme Commander Zix stood in his command center on Zephyr, Prime, and watched the approaching fleet with the resignation of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. Half of his own forces had defected to the Coalition, taking with them not just ships and weapons, but the terrible knowledge that Zephyrians could choose to disobey. His society was collapsing as individual members of his species began to think thoughts that had been forbidden for 1,000 years. "Sir," his aide reported with the mechanical precision of someone trying not to think about what he was saying, "the Coalition fleet is requesting our surrender. They promise that if we lay down our arms, we will be treated according to the laws of war and given the opportunity to rebuild our society based on individual freedom." Zix almost laughed at the irony. The humans were offering his people the same thing they had given every other species they liberated, the chance to choose their own destiny. It was the one thing the Zephyrian Empire had never been able to understand or combat. The battle for Zephyr Prime lasted exactly 4 hours, the same length of time the Empire's first conquest had taken centuries before. But this time, the quick victory belonged to the forces of freedom. Zephyrian defenses, designed to protect against external threats, proved useless against the enemy within. As Coalition forces approached the planet, Zephyrian soldiers laid down their weapons and walked away from their posts. Ship captains ignored orders to fire on the approaching fleet. Even civilians began dismantling the neural subjugation arrays that had controlled their thoughts for generations. Captain Santos led the landing force that secured the Empire's capital city, expecting to face desperate resistance from the last loyal forces. Instead, she found empty government buildings and abandoned military bases. The Zephyrian leadership had simply stopped giving orders when they realized that no one was listening anymore. The formal surrender ceremony took place in the same crystal chamber where the Empire's war leaders had once planned the conquest of the galaxy. But instead of Zephyrian officials, the room was filled with representatives from every species the Empire had enslaved. They came not as conquerors, but as liberators offering the same gift that humanity had given them, the right to choose. General Morrison, now serving as Earth's representative to the Galactic Freedom Council, read the terms of surrender to an audience that included former slaves and former masters sitting side by side. "The Zephyrian Empire is hereby dissolved," he announced. "All species under its control are granted immediate independence and the right to determine their own governments. All neural subjugation technology is to be destroyed, and no future attempts at mental control will be tolerated by the Coalition." But the real victory was not written in any document. It was visible in the eyes of beings who had learned to think for themselves, who had discovered that they could disagree with authority and choose their own path among the stars. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity had intended. Admiral Kane stood at the viewing port of her ship and watched the lights of a dozen worlds twinkling in the darkness. Each light represented millions of beings who had chosen freedom over security, chaos over order, the messy uncertainty of independent thought over the cold comfort of mental slavery. It was not a perfect galaxy they had created, but it was a free one. "Admiral," Lieutenant Murphy called from his station, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. President Carter wants to know if we're ready to come home." Kane smiled and thought about the blue world that had given the galaxy the gift of stubborn, chaotic, Impossible to control human thinking. Tell the president we'll be home soon, she said. But first, we have a few more worlds to teach about the beautiful. Chaos of Freedom.